Welcome to the 14th episode of the Tertius Times. Yesterday, in keeping with the theme of this week, again in honor of the Labor Day holiday here in the U.S. on Monday, I summarized a variety of news articles on modern-day slavery. Today, I will continue the focus on violations of work ethics with an emphasis on child labor. This first story, how businesses can stop child labor in their supply chains, from Forbes, August 25th, 2021, reports that there are an estimated 160 million 5 to 17-year-olds in some form of child labor. By the end of next year, 9 million more children are expected to be added. The article states that, quote, child labor is in many of today's finished goods and produce, and not just in the well-known areas of cocoa production and agriculture, unquote. But the tide may be changing. BlackRock, quote, the world's largest investment management firm, unquote, the United Nations General Assembly, and Germany's federal government, along with tracking technologies, are taking actions to examine corporate supply chain ethics. The author of this article, Neha Desai Shah, president of GEP, quote, a leading provider of procurement and supply chain solutions to Fortune 500 companies, unquote, suggests some proactive steps to reduce and ultimately eliminate underage labor. One, quote, assume child labor is being used without blame, unquote, since it is sadly a global phenomenon. Two, quote, require certifications and programs, unquote, particularly in regions known to be havens of child labor. Three, quote, establish a SWAT team, unquote, specialists who can identify problematic areas with suppliers. Four, quote, ramp up auditing, unquote, to continue an ongoing process to verify child labor is not part of the supply chain. Five, quote, create transparency across your entire supply chain, unquote. And six, quote, find alternative sources of supply, unquote. Pray for children who are trapped in this vicious cycle of underage labor. Pray that they would be liberated from the forced drudgery of their lives and enjoy the freedom to experience the life all children yearn for. Pray for businesses who, knowingly or unknowingly, participate in the crime of robbing children by abusing them. Pray that those businesses would cease their involvement in supply chains fueled by child labor. Pray for those who are involved in child labor that they would see the inhumanity of their practice and work to eliminate it from the earth. Pray also that those of us outside the system would raise our voices to free the victims of underage forced work. For more information on Germany's law, see German Bundestag passes new law on supply chain ethics, from Deutsche Welle, June 11th, 2021. Now let's look at a couple of articles that highlight the supply chain. Quote, children as young as 7 years old are working with hazardous chemicals, heavy machinery, or carrying heavy loads, unquote. This article, Bangladesh, child labor rampant in leather industry, Eurasia Review, July 26, 2021, begins, quote, endangering their health and lives in Bangladesh's lucrative leather industry, according to a study, unquote. It later adds, children are, quote, working 12 to 14 hours, 6 days a week in almost all processes along the leather supply chain, from animal slaughter and skinning to dyeing, waste disposal, and manufacturing of leather products and byproducts such as glue and meat, unquote. Some of those children suffer from, quote, severe burns from a hydraulic acid accident. Monthly income ranged from $90.80 US to $11.80. That's roughly $3.50 to 45 cents per work day. Although Bangladesh ratified the International Labor Organization's worst form of child labor convention, it consistently fails to monitor abuses and enforce existing laws against child labor, particularly in leather tanneries where the worst violations are occurring. Pray for the children of Bangladesh, particularly the large numbers of those children who are engaged in illegal labor practices in the leather industry. Pray for the government and businesses of Bangladesh that these children would be freed from the violations imposed upon them. Pray particularly for those adults who are involved in the leather industry, that they would fully understand the transgressions they are participating in, repent, and seek constructive ways to abolish child labor from their industry, from their country, and from the entire world. This final article, Rural Poverty Drives Child Labor in Laos, despite state laws prohibiting the practice, Radio Free Asia, June 2nd, 2021, states that rural ethnic minorities suffer the most child labor infractions in Laos, since parents are often involved in farming and the children assist in that work or care for younger siblings at home, neglecting their education in the process, thus enabling the cycle of poverty to continue. Although the small Southeast Asian communist country has laws prohibiting child labor in dangerous occupations and regulates their work hours in approved jobs, child labor in other industries, again, such as agriculture, remain nonetheless. In fact, out of 186 countries included in a recent report, Laos ranked 143 in terms of child labor violations. Well over a quarter of all Laotian children were involved in child labor, and just under a quarter were not in the school during roughly the same time period, 2015 to 2019 and 2020. In all, 178,000 children in Laos, most from one of the 49 ethnic minorities in the country, are forced to work, mostly in rural areas, quote, in agriculture, forestry, or fishing, unquote, according to a study cited by the article. Although teachers encourage parents to keep their children in school, the parents, who often face critical poverty and, despite help teachers offer to look after younger siblings, parents usually refuse such assistance. Some children are even forced by their parents into marriage. The COVID pandemic also created more challenges, since many of the poor children do not have internet access. In the end, however, as the article points out, a change of attitude is desperately needed so that parents understand the importance of education in the life of their children, making it much more probable that children will be able to climb out of the cyclic pattern of poverty in Laos. Pray for the children of Laos, that they would be, like other children around the world, forced to work, freed to live their lives as children. Pray for the people of Laos, that they would recognize the value of children, not in terms of labor, but of their future, and change their hearts and minds to allow their children to enjoy life, to learn, and to enable them to lift their country out of poverty and out of the continuous desperate straits such extreme poverty creates. Pray for the country's leaders, that they would recognize the same potential from their younger citizens, particularly those of the many ethnic minorities who live in Laos. Thank you once again for listening. I hope this podcast proves to encourage you to pray or to become actively involved, or both, in any of these issues brought to your attention.